Next conversation today is with Democratic Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado, fresh off his announcement this morning that he is running for governor. Welcome back to Next.
Thanks so much for having me. It's good to see you.
So obviously Colorado's voters sent you to Washington to do one job, and you are now essentially asking them for permission to change jobs partway through. Why should they, as your employer, authorize a job switch partway through your commitment?
I actually think that's an amazing way of describing what's happening here. And like everybody, or almost everybody, the re-election of Donald Trump has made me think really seriously about the state of our democracy, the state of our economy, and I feel very strongly that the place I can make the biggest difference for Colorado's future is here. And obviously I'm going to have to persuade the voters that that's true, but I think in the end they'll share that view.
Is that acknowledgement an acknowledgement that at the federal level, Trump and Republicans have your party boxed in, beaten for the foreseeable future, and that the place where Democrats can make a difference and an impact is at the state level?
I believe that. I think what you just said is correct. I think the Democratic Party was repudiated at the national level by Donald Trump. I blame him for many, many things, but I don't blame him for being elected president. You know, the Democratic Party failed to come up with a compelling vision for the future of our economy and for our kids. And I think the place where there's going to be meaningful pushback, I think, is going to be the states.
There's a lot of soul searching going on in your party about direction, and one of the conversations is about whether your party's been associated with elitism and the elites. I mean, by any measure, right, you're an elite, right? You came from a very well-known, prominent family, went to great schools, accumulated wealth. How do you convince Coloradans that you understand what working-class folks go through?
Well, I've spent 30 years working with Coloradans, and I think they know who I am and I know who they are. And it is my concern that everybody in our state and everybody in the country should be able to have the American dream fulfilled for their children, and the very serious acknowledgement that we can't. You know, this is the first moment in American history when people that are 30 years old, half of them are going to earn less than their parents. The young men in their 20s in America are earning less, 40% less in income today than they were in 1976. As I travel Colorado, Kyle, and I've done it relentlessly year after year, day after day, week after week, that's what I hear people say. We love our state, but we can't get ahead. We feel like our kids aren't going to live here. I think people know that I've fought for them at every level. I fought for them as the superintendent of the Denver Public Schools. I've fought for them every day in the Senate. I just feel strongly that the place I can keep that fight going the best is here. And I think people know who I am.
Many of America's most expensive places to live, where opportunity is most limited, are run by your party, including Colorado. So how does your party fix that?
That is a fact. We have to be for building more housing. We have to be for building housing that's less expensive. We have to be for reducing regulations so that it doesn't take years and years and years for people to build housing all over the state. One of the things that I loved about being superintendent of schools in Denver was that I never met a teacher who didn't live in Denver. It was emphatically not Seattle. It was emphatically not San Francisco. Now, all over Colorado, there are people that are having to drive 2 hours to get to work. We're turning into California. And with all respect to California, I don't want Colorado to turn into California. I want people to be able to live near where they work. And part of that's going to be cutting red tape. And we're going to need to do that.
Does that involve changing the way local control works in the state?
I think that there is nothing that we're going to be able to do meaningfully on housing without collaboration from the State House and municipalities and community and counties. And we're going to have a governor who understands that, who can work together with people to get an outcome that's the right outcome in Denver, which may not be the same outcome in Rifle or the same outcome in Grand Junction. All these places need housing, and Lyman, all these places need housing. I think the solutions aren't going to be the same, but I think that Colorado is demanding that its elected leaders come together, and frankly, our private sector, our nonprofit sector, come together and help solve this huge pain point. There's not a county in our state where people believe their kids are going to be able to afford to live there.
Do you think affordability and opportunity is the single biggest issue for the state?
I think the single biggest issue for the state is people feeling like if they work hard, they can get ahead. And if they work hard, their kids can stay here. And that's maybe another way of saying what you just said.
Okay. Governor Polis has put a big emphasis on this as well. Do you think he's measurably moved the needle on it?
I think he has, and I think, the first year he went out there and he tried to get something passed that didn't pass, and he came back the next year to try again, and I give him huge credit for that. I think he'd be the first one to say that this job is undone, and I don't blame him for that. I think he's done his level best. There's more for us to do.
Let's talk about the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Should it be reformed, repealed? What do you think?
I think that we need to look really hard at the way we fund public services in Colorado, and we're going to have a relentless conversation about TABOR. And I have no doubt that it needs to be reformed, and we're going to. But I want to understand what people's view of that is. I think there are a lot of different opinions in the state. I think there's a general view that it is not serving Colorado well in its current configuration.
You ask people about some of the component pieces of it, and some of the component pieces are very popular. I get the sense that Democrats dance around this because they know that there's going to be a political price to be paid for whoever decides to lead the charge on this. We have a governor who won by 20 points, who is not willing to spend his political capital on taking on TABOR. You won your last race by 15 points. Are you going to be the Democrat that's going to say, even if it ends up with arrows in my back, I'm going to take this on? Because that person hasn't stepped forward so far from your party.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly willing to do that, and I believe our state wants to do that. I think Republicans and Democrats across our state believe that we're not funding our public services adequately, and that it's time for us to take a look at the way we consider this issue. So I'm not scared of it. I'm actually looking forward to it. We have to do it. As a father of 3 daughters that I've raised in this state, I know that we need to address it, and we will.
The hard line that Governor Polis has drawn is on the taxpayer approval of new taxes. He's suggested rolling back some other parts of TABOR, but that was a hard line for him. Is that a hard line for you?
I think that's a very significant place that the Colorado's voters are unlikely to want to change their minds. I think they want to have the chance to be able to vote on tax increases. I think there are a lot of things beyond that are up for discussion.
There seems to be a contrast between how you and how Attorney General Phil Weiser, who's also running for governor, have taken on the Trump administration. You've told me that you're trying to pick your battles. He's been suing the Trump administration left and right, and certainly lawsuits and courts have scored some significant victories against the Trump administration. How is your strategy working?
Well, I think, first of all, I congratulate Phil Weiser for his leadership here, and I am extremely glad that courts have been standing up for the Constitution and saying that there is no president who's king, including Donald Trump. Whether he will listen to those courts at the end of the day is still an open question, and every American, whether they're a Democrat or Republican or unaffiliated voter, needs to consider that. I think I have led an important fight on nominations that Donald Trump has put through. I haven't won the fight in the sense that with 53 votes, the Republicans are able to push through the likes of Bobby Kennedy, for example, the likes of Tulsi Gabbard. But I think that it's really important for us to air that and to make sure we have that debate in public. I think we have pushed back incredibly effectively on the president's abandoning or seeming abandonment of Ukraine. That's become harder for him to do. There are now Republicans that are joining me in the work that we're doing on the floor and other places to say that this is not a fight just for Ukraine, but a fight for democracy, a fight for our national security. And Donald Trump doesn't really understand what he's doing. With respect to just the last week on tariffs, I think I was the second Democrat to join a piece of legislation being led by Maria Cantwell, a Democrat, and Chuck Grassley from Iowa, to say, listen, you're not a king. You don't have the right to just implement tariffs that don't go through Congress. And already, before I left to come back here yesterday, we had 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats. So look, this is not a battle that's going to be won today. And there's a lot here that needs to be won that was lost in the last election, as you pointed out, and the election that Donald Trump won the first time he was elected president. But we're going to continue to fight. We're going to continue to push hard. When I say, I think it's important to fight strategically, what I mean is that, you can't fight a wildfire from behind. You can't fight a wildfire without a strategy, without thinking about where the fire break is, where the river is, where the place where you can make your stand really is. And I think that's important. I think that's an important and honest assessment of how I think we should be fighting this.
I think this issue matters a lot to Democratic primary voters because I hear from Democrats on it. I'm sure you hear from a lot of Democrats on it. I mean, and you supported more of President Trump's cabinet nominees than most other Senate Democrats. You supported his picks to lead energy and labor and agriculture. I wrote them down. CIA, the VA, transportation, Interior, State Department. These are folks who have gone on to oversee the mass layoffs of Coloradans at the Forest Service and the Park Service. Do you regret your support of those folks?
I don't. For every one of them, I had my reasons, and I think they were good reasons. We can go through them. I mean, I supported the Agriculture Secretary because I'm on the Agriculture Committee. Our farmers and ranchers, by the way, most of whom are Republicans in Colorado, are in really tough shape because of a whole variety of things, ranging from drought to Trump's tariffs to the cost of inputs. And I thought it was important for us to have a senator who had a working relationship with the person in that. Same thing with the agency, same thing at the VA, where Colorado has some of the highest numbers of veterans of any state in the country, and they've got serious needs that we need to work with the VA to address. The Energy Secretary, with whom I don't agree on virtually anything, is a Coloradan who's extremely well known and well liked by many people in Colorado. I don't agree with him on these issues, but
he's the guy that says your party's hyping wildfires.
And obviously, I totally disagree with that. And you asked about the people that have been fired. I've led the fight to make sure that the administration is going to pay a price for the firefighters that it's laying off.
Can I ask you a question?
Just yesterday,
I want to ask you this. You say that by voting for these people and supporting them, that pays off in some way for Coloradans. How has your support for them paid off in these scenarios where people are being laid off?
Kyle, I think that's a fair question, and we'll have to look, 2 years from now, to really answer it.
Okay.
I think that's a fair question.
As governor, you would have executive power.
Let me say that.
Yeah.
Well, that's
go ahead. If there's something you want to add.
You go ahead. No,
right.
I don't want to. I'm not here to filibuster.
It won't be our only conversation. As governor, you would hold executive power. One of the things that you could do is you could veto or sign bills into law. Yesterday, Governor Jared Polis signed some pretty significant new gun control legislation in Colorado. It's going to require people to go through in-person training in order to be able to buy some semi-autos with detachable magazines. Would you have signed that?
I would have signed that. I'm proud of him for signing it.
So how do you convince Coloradans that you can give them the full-time representation in the Senate that they're paying you to provide while running for governor?
The only way is to do it, and I know I can do it, and I will do it.
Do you think it's different than your Senate campaigns when you were running for re-election and serving? Do you view it as pretty similar, like running for governor while serving in the Senate?
I haven't really thought it through that way, but I think that I certainly have run campaigns before while I've been in this job. But look, I've made a choice, and the choice is that I think that I can do more to fight on behalf of Colorado by being here. I've made the choice to say that I think that I can help lead Colorado at a moment when Colorado's leadership is desperately needed by the rest of the country. And I've made a judgment that that can be a place where I can be much more effective at the moment than the work that I happen to be doing in D.C., where I think I actually have been, by any measure, quite effective. That's my judgment. And it will be up to Colorado's voters to make a decision about that. I feel confident that I'll earn their support. And I think that's, for me, not just about this campaign, but about whether we can demonstrate in this country that our exercise in self-government actually still works, that we can come together as Republicans and Democrats and unaffiliated voters, as a private sector and a public sector, to make sure that we can restore the American dream. Because here's one thing I know, Kyle, we will never save our democracy if people feel like their kids aren't having economic opportunity. And too many people feel in Colorado that their kids don't. Too many people across this country feel that their kids don't. And I think that's a battle that's worth fighting. And we need all of Colorado to join in it.
When you said that this morning at your campaign launch, it caught my ear. It sounded to me like you were saying that rather than just telling people to fight for democracy, you have to first convince them that democracy works for them, that they're getting something out of it, namely opportunity. Is your party or some in your party making a mistake by jumping to just across-the-board resistance?
Thank you for being there, and thank you for saying that. That is what I believe. That is what I believe. if people do not see opportunity, economic opportunity for themselves and for their families, having a conversation about why the rule of law is important or why the separation of powers is important will fall on deaf ears. How do I know that? Because that's human history. We know it from human history. That's when you lose a democracy, when people feel like there isn't opportunity, and when always some sort of strong man, it's usually a strong man, shows up and says, as Trump did, I alone can fix it. You don't need a democracy. You should expect your private sector and your public sector to be hopelessly bankrupt, hopelessly corrupt. That's the dark vision Donald Trump ran on. And we have to fight against that vision. But we also have to show a different future for our kids here in Colorado and for America. I think that's what's at stake in this election, and that's why I'm running for governor.
I want to ask you a couple of questions that are political questions, but at the end of the day, they're about who represents Colorado and our interests. Your plan would be to stay in the Senate the whole time you're running for governor, and if elected governor, you would then pick your own replacement for the Senate. Is that what you intend to do?
That is what I intend.
Okay. So obviously, last two times that happened, you had Frank Murkowski in Alaska, who selected Lisa Murkowski, and you had John Cornyn in New Jersey, who selected Frank Menendez. I mean, the last two people to do this, those guys chose their own daughter and somebody who turned out to be a convicted felon. Like, not great, right?
I can tell you that my own daughters will tell you that they are the last people that I would ever pick for this job. But look, I was appointed, as you know, to this seat, and it matters a lot to me who's in it. And the thing that I believe is that we have an unbelievable amount of talent in Colorado, an unbelievable amount of political leadership, and I'm looking forward to thinking about that, but not thinking about it, until this election is done.
Well, neither of us believe that you haven't thought about it, so I'm going to ask you this. Is your initial inclination that you should select, if you were to be elected governor, the best person to hold that seat long term, or a caretaker who would only serve until Coloradans could make the choice?
I could make the argument both ways, and I certainly haven't made a decision about it.
Okay, you see value in both of those and haven't sort of.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, that's fair enough. Lastly, and again, this won't be our final conversation. I told Phil Weiser the same thing. There's going to be lots of time. It's early in the process. I have described you on this program as a cicada of confrontation. Some people in politics are all anger and all noise all the time, and that's not really you. You're kind of more quiet. You're more mellow. But every once in a while, you do emerge with like a lot of noise and anger or frustration about an issue. And honestly, I thought about this. I don't really have a question. I just thought I should say it to your face because I've said it behind your back. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Okay, right. Like you'll be very
watch your show?
Well, you'll be very chill for years, like doing your thing, and then like you take Ted Cruz's head off, and then like you're chill for a couple of years, and then off you go about something.
Well, it's kind of funny, even to this day, after Ted Cruz, after Bobby Kennedy, after Tulsi Gabbard, all this stuff, I still, reporters, print reporters in particular, I think, can't write a story without describing me as mild-mannered Michael Bennet, which I will take. I'm happy to have that. My kids, when they read that, say, who are they talking about? Because that's not the guy we saw, because when they hear that voice on the Senate floor, they text to each other, because they know what's coming. Nobody's mild-mannered all the time. But listen, there's a lot about where we are as a country and a state that I'm deeply, deeply worried about. I am so proud to live in Colorado. I think everybody feels like they're proud to live in Colorado, but we're all feeling like our kids may not be able to live here. That's a huge issue. I think we've got a lot of wind at our back as a state, partly because of the leadership that we've had that other states don't have. But as a nation, our democracy really is at risk. As a nation, we have got to create an economy again that grows for everybody, not just for the people at the very top, or we're going to lose the democracy for the reason you and I were talking about. The stakes could not be higher. And I feel very lucky to be able to bring a perspective that's based on a really pretty unusual set of experiences, most of which has been, serving the people of Colorado to this new role. And I'm really looking forward to the campaign, and beyond that, really looking forward to bringing people together from across the state to address some of the challenges like TABOR, like the housing problems that we're facing, energy, water. I mean, the list is long, and I think our only limit is our imagination and the broken politics that we have.
Senator Michael Bennet, thank you for your time. We'll continue the conversation down the trail.
Thanks for having me.